Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm going to be doing the knitting book tag, which was created by Kara from Wild Book Garden. I'm going to link the original down in the description below, but I just saw this yesterday and I thought it looked like a ton of fun, and I love knitting, so I thought it was really a fun way of bringing together two of my favorite hobbies, and just, it's all themed around knitting, which I just think is cool. So that's what we're doing today, and I think let's just go ahead and dive into the questions because I think they're really cool. So the first question is cast on. The first section you scope out in a bookstore, library, or online shopping. This depends a little bit. I try to do most of my shopping in store because it's too easy to add to cart online. But if I go to like Barnes & Noble, the first place I go is the new releases section because in my Barnes & Noble that's like right next to the front door. But if I go into either the library or my favorite independent bookstore in town, I don't know why I said it that way, my favorite indie bookstore downtown, if I go into either of those, I tend to go straight for the sci-fi and fantasy section because that's what I read the most of. Question number 2 is knit. Obviously a staple of knitting, a super hyped book that completely delivered for you. So for this, I chose Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. You may notice that you're directly next to a giant stack of books. I chose Mexican Gothic because this is one of the few books that I've actually read during the height of its popularity. I read this shortly after it came out a couple of years ago, and I'd seen so many people talking about how great this book was, and so I couldn't resist. I needed to find out why this book was so great, and I'm really glad that I did, because this totally delivered for me on the kind of creepiness and the really fun gothic atmosphere. Plus, Silvia Moreno Garcia has turned into one of my absolute favorite authors. I've loved everything I've read from her, so I'm really glad that I picked this one up. Question number 3 is Pearl. As important as the Knit Stitch, but probably not as famous. Name a character that you think deserves more love from the fandom, from the author, from other characters, etc. So for this, I have chosen Thara Kalahar from the Cemeteries of Amalo books. He is a witness for the dead, meaning he's able to contact the spirits of the recently deceased to ask them questions, and depending on how recent their death was or what kind of death it was, he may or may not be able to get some answers, but he uses these abilities as a detective. I really love these books. They're spin-offs from The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, which is one of my all-time favorite books. But I think that Thara Kalahar deserves more love from the characters around him because he is just constantly going through a lot. He's always having a hard time. He has so many things that he's dealing with at all times always, and there are just always people being mean to him. So he is kind of like across this series developing a circle of friends and a support network, but there is just like so much going on for him all the time, and it's just like compacted by people being mean to him. Question number 4 is Chart, a book or author you've been meaning to read but somehow just haven't gotten around to, and why? So I've chosen, I feel like this is going to be a really obvious answer, but The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I haven't gotten to it because it's really chunky. I just have not set aside the time to do that. And over the last couple of months, because it's been in the middle of the semester, I've not had the time to kind of carve out to dedicate to a book this big. I am hoping to get to it maybe over the holidays. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but it is kind of a unofficial goal for the holidays for me. I would like to go ahead and read this. The other reason I haven't read it, though, is that I have heard a few reviews that have made me hesitant on this one. I don't know if I'm really going to like it all that much. I've heard that there's some instances of like protagonists doing things that are pretty awful that are never questioned, and it's kind of hand waved away as like, oh well, they're the protagonists, so clearly it's not that bad because they're the good guys. So I've heard that a little bit about this, and I don't really like that in books. The other reason is that a friend of mine started this and she didn't really get into it. It just didn't hold her attention, and we have similar opinions on books quite frequently, so I'm just not sure if this is going to be one for me, but I do want to try it and go ahead and get it either read and find out that I love it, or read it and get it off my shelf. Either way. Next is Double Pointed Needles. Recommend a series that you can actually read out of order, and one that people might think you can read out of order, but you actually can't. So a series that you can read out of order, and I'm going to go hold up a book that I have not actually read, but a series you can read out of order is The Cemetery of Forgotten Books by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I have not read this particular book. I read The Prisoner of Heaven, which is technically the third book, and it was like a whole complete experience. I didn't need these other books to understand what was going on, and having done some more research into the series, it appears that like all 4 books in the series kind of circle around this specific set of characters and around this Cemetery of Forgotten Books, but each one is like a standalone story. So you can pick up any one of these in any order, although you could also read them straight through if you wanted to do that as well, but you can read them out of order. And the series that I've chosen that you can't read out of order is the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, and I've chosen this one because I think that these come across as being kind of this episodic space adventure, and I think that it very much is that. Each story is very different, but if you read them out of order, you're going to be really confused because Murderbot goes across a kind of very specific character arc across particularly the first 4 books that you need to kind of reach each step to understand what is going on and the decisions that Murderbot makes across the series. Plus there are some recurring characters that, like, you're going to miss the impact of when they show back up if you haven't read about them already. So despite being kind of an episodic space adventure, I think you really do need to read the Murderbot Diaries in order. Okay, question number 6 is Cables, a book you heard negative reviews for but you ended up loving. So I haven't heard a whole lot of negative reviews of this, but I noticed a trend in the negative reviews. So I've chosen A Marvelous Light by Freya Marske, which is a book that I absolutely loved. I think this is a brilliantly written romance. But that is kind of where I've heard the negative reviews, is that I think the marketing for this book, when it first came out, it's really shiny and it's really reflecting the ring light there and my computer screens. The marketing for this book when it first came out really focused on the magic elements and the fantasy elements and the kind of intrigue that's going on, because this follows Edwin and Robin, who encounter each other when Robin is accidentally named the new liaison for the human world, or not the human world, the non-magic world to the magic world, but he doesn't know about magic at all, and he kind of gets into this situation where he gets cursed and he has no idea what's going on. And then Edwin is his counterpart in the magical world, and they have to work together to try and get Robin uncursed. And also, figure out why he got cursed in the first place. But I think a lot of the marketing focused on those elements and the kind of mystery part of this story, but this is very much a romance novel. It is very slow-paced, very character-driven. It's really just about Edwin and Robin and the development of their relationship, which is kind of developed across this sequence of events where they're trying to uncurse Robin, but it's not so much about that effort to get him uncursed as it is about the way that relationship develops as a result of that. So I think this is just a slower paced book and has a different focus than what people were expecting. So I've seen quite a few reviews of people being disappointed by this book because they just didn't get what they thought they were getting. Question number 7 is Skein. Why do we still sell yarn like this? A trope you can't stand. First of all, I want to say, I don't mind skeins. I think some people hate them because you have to actually get a swift and a winder, which are these 2 separate tools, to actually use them, because otherwise they just get tangled and you end up with 400 yards of knots. But skeins are actually really space efficient and I believe easy to pack when shipping. So I actually don't mind skeins. I think they're kind of great in terms of storage. Anyway, for a trope that I don't like, I chose the miscommunication trope because I hate it almost every time it ever shows up in anything. I don't read a ton of contemporary romance, but I do read some fantasy romance and sci-fi romance, and anytime miscommunication comes up, it always frustrates me because it almost invariably is a result of the characters just refusing to talk to each other, and it's always this minor thing that could be easily resolved, but instead of doing that, they're just gonna not talk to each other, and it turns into a whole big thing, and it's just if you would just communicate for half a second, this would be fixed. And I get really frustrated with that. Question number 8 is Gauge Swatch. Share an author who is always a good fit for you. So I want to go back to Silvia Moreno Garcia. I'm not going to pull out Mexican Gothic again, but as I said, I've loved everything I've read from her, and she writes across a lot of different genres. So I've also read these 2, and I have a couple more on her shelf that I have either started or want to start soon that I'm also really enjoying. But she writes across a lot of different genres. Mexican Gothic is Gothic horror. We have kind of historical fantasy and high fantasy. And I really enjoy everything I've read from her. I think that her writing style works beautifully across different genres. And I'm always really engaged by the way she writes characters. So I really don't care what genre she's writing in. I always pick up the books that she writes because it always just perfectly works for me, and I really enjoy, again, her characters and then the way she crafts her stories. I think they're just really engaging and they grab your attention very early on. Question number 9, almost said 10. Question number 9 is Stitch Marker. Share a specific scene that stands out clearly in your mind. No spoilers. This is going to be really hard to share because the scene that sticks out for me is a major spoiler, but all I'm going to say is that there is a scene in the middle of Jade City where there is a plot twist that destroyed me. I think about it constantly. The plot twist in this book destroyed me, and I think about it all of the time. Every once in a while I just remember it and kind of start crying. So this is, I think, of any scene, this has the most like striking scene in it to me, because I keep coming back to it, and it's a scene that solidified for me my like love and respect for Fonda Lee's writing, because she is absolutely fearless in doing things to her characters in a way that I think a lot of authors aren't. And I just appreciate her willingness to kind of go there and see things to their logical end. And I love the way that this book turns out, even though at the halfway point I was like, oh my god, I can't believe you fucking did that. Question number 10 is yarn weight. Super useful info to take in at a glance. Do you have some bookish taste buddies? This could be someone you have really similar taste to in general, or for a specific kind of book. So in person, this would be my best friend. I don't know if she wants me to mention her name on here, so I'm just going to call her A. But if A tells me I'm going to love a book, I'm going to love a book. She has never once been wrong. We've been best friends since high school. And yeah, she has never once recommended me a book I didn't end up enjoying. She was one of the people that read A Marvelous Light before me and told me I was going to love it, and then I loved it. She's also the person that got me to read The Goblin Emperor, which is now one of my all-time favorite books. So yeah, any book she recommends is going to be good, I know. Now on BookTube more specifically, I usually like to watch Mara from Books Like Whoa for mystery recommendations. I love the way that she describes mysteries, and she gives you a lot of useful information in deciding what you want to read without obviously spoiling the twists or any of the solutions for the mysteries. But I find that mysteries that she recommends I tend to really enjoy. And then Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany, which is a name that I always get kind of caught up on. I always stumble over that one. But I think she gives really good sci-fi and fantasy recs for my taste. A lot of the things that she has rated highly, I have gone on to really enjoy. So yeah, those are kind of my main two that I go to for specific recommendations on BookTube when I'm just like wanting to find something that I'm gonna like, as opposed to just like watching for content. Although both of them I also really love all of their videos. So yeah, those are probably the two booktubers that I think have the closest reading taste to mine in terms of those genres, at least. Question number 11 is that novelty yarn someone gifted to you because they heard you like knitting, but it's impossible to work with. What is a book that should have been perfect for you on paper, but just didn't work out? I don't have just like a specific book, but an author, which is Neil Gaiman. Basically every book of his, all of the premises sound like they should be perfect for me, and I have just never loved any of his books. His writing should be fantastic for me, for my taste in writing. It just doesn't work for me. I don't know why, but I've read The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I've started in DNF'd Neverwhere. I want to go back and try that one again. That was kind of a soft DNF, but DNF'd that one. I read Norse mythology and then promptly unhauled it because I liked it, but it just didn't stick with me. So I feel like that's usually my problem, is that his books, I'll enjoy them at the time, but they just really don't stick with me, and they're not like standouts for me. But every single premise seems like it should be a standout for me, and so I'm always a little bit disappointed when I pick up any of his books. Question number 12 is Scarf, the perfect starter project. Recommend a good book for getting into a genre or kind of book. So I should have left it out. It's in this stack. Hang on. All Systems Red, Martha Wells. I think Murderbot is a really good way to get into sci-fi for a couple of reasons. One of them being that it's not very sciencey. Like, there's a little bit of explanation here and there on like specific things you need to know in the moment that you need to know them, but there isn't like a really heavy emphasis on the science of anything. It's much more character driven and focused on like the experiences of these people in the world that exists, or the kind of universe that as it exists. And so I really think that that makes it approachable as a science fiction, because you aren't kind of getting bogged down in scientific explanations and details. The other reason I think that it's a good place to start is that the characters, I feel like it's got really solid character work, and I think that Murderbot as a protagonist is quite relatable and pretty funny and snarky. And I know that Murderbot doesn't work for everyone. I've seen plenty of people not like this book, but I think that for a lot of people, Murderbot is a pretty relatable character, and so it's really easy to get invested in Murderbot's story and kind of keep reading for that reason. And then kind of lastly, it's super short. So like, if you're intimidated by sci-fi, you only have to read like 100 and some pages of it. Question number 13 is socks. Handmade socks are way harder than they look. Talk about an underappreciated author who deserves more hype. I picked two for kind of different reasons. One of them is Nicholas Kaufman, who wrote Dying Is My Business and Die and Stay Dead, which are two of my favorite, like, fun turn your brain off and enjoy the like action adventure story kind of books. They have really fun characters. I really like Trench as a protagonist. There's a lot of like crazy magical creatures and funny villains, and there's just a lot of good stuff happening here. And it's not something that I really have to like focus on. It's just a good time. And I really enjoy his writing kind of for that reason. I think that there's always just something fun about it. And I never see anybody talk about his books. He also writes horror. This is urban fantasy, but he also writes horror, which I have found is pretty enjoyable as well. I think that he does a good job with writing characters who are kind of relatable and easy to root for, which I find, for me, works really well in horror because it kind of makes me dread what's going to happen to them even more. And then the other author I picked that I wanted to talk about was Aliette de Bodard. I've got Fireheart Tiger here, but I could have picked from any of her books, really, because everything I've read from her is fantastic. I think her books are a little more what I would call chewy. I have this scale that I use to kind of rate books and how much effort you need to put in to read them. So it's the crunchy, chewy scale. And so, like, something like Dying Is My Business is going to be quite crunchy. It's like potato chip book, right? Like, it's really easy to sit down, consume a lot of it. It's fun. It's good at the time. It's not necessarily nutritious, but you're going to have a good time with it. Something like Fireheart Tiger falls a little bit further on the chewy side of the scale. I would not say this is all the way at the other end. This isn't quite as dense as something like a William Faulkner novel or something like that, but it's got a little more depth to it. There's some interesting thematic elements happening. This is a book in particular that is much more about, or that is about kind of abusive relationships and cycles of abuse. And it's looking at kind of interpersonal abuse, but also larger scale, like colonial abuse. And I just think that's really fascinating. It does take a little bit of effort to focus in on and pay attention to what's happening, pay attention to what the characters are saying, and pick up on the little details that kind of guide you along through those thematic elements. So this isn't all the way on the other end. It's not entirely a chewy book, but it's further up the scale. And so I think Aliette de Bodard does that really well. I really like the way that she introduces thematic elements into these really fun stories. This one is, I think, inspired by pre-colonial Vietnam, but she also has the Zuya Universe novels, which are all like space opera adventures. Most of them are novellas, but they're all set in this kind of futuristic world where it's like, what if Vietnam won the space race, and kind of this Vietnamese-inspired sci-fi world. It's really fun. I think it's really atmospheric, but again, has these kind of fun thematic elements, and I just don't see enough people talking about her work because I think that it's really good. Also, a lot of it is sapphic or queer in other ways, and I think that it's some really good representation and just fun to read. I love her characters. I love everything about her writing. Question number 14 is Cast Off. A weirdly specific thing that you love, could be a trope, something in book construction, etc. So the thing that I've chosen is like really fun color combinations on the naked hardbacks for new release hardback books. This is gonna be very weird, but like, you know when you get a new hardback and you take the dust jacket off, and usually it's just like the plain, like, there's specific like one color board, and then the spine is like the title in foiling, right? I love when there's like really fun and different color combinations, and it's not just like black and white or black and silver or white with black, and you know, or one I got recently was brown with brown. I like when there's a fun color combination underneath, so I picked out a few of my favorites to show you to illustrate what I mean by that. So this is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. Beautiful dust jacket. I love the cover of that book. But then they've chosen this like beautiful sky blue. And then the spine is like, it looks purple here, but it's really more of a hot pink in person. So there's this like beautiful blue and pink color, and I think that's lovely. And then the other one I have sitting here, which I'm going to try not to knock over my drink, is Eyes of the Void by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I just got yesterday, and I just discovered that this has a wonderful color combination. But this one, again, beautiful dust jacket, but they've gone with this lovely like mint green, and then it's lavender on the spine, and this is like my all-time favorite color combination. I love green and purple together, so this, like, just by default is my favorite like naked hardback on any book that I own. But yeah, I love these when there's just like a fun color combination and it's not just like super basic neutral colors. All right, so the last question is crafting party, which is tag some people who craft or who might like to answer these questions. I don't have anyone to tag, really. Editing Hope here. There was somebody I wanted to tag here. I just forgot. Anyway, I would like to tag Di from Dices19. I'm going to link her channel below because I really like her videos, but also I know that she knits and I think that she would have some really interesting answers to these questions. But if you see this video and you enjoyed these questions and you want to do it, consider yourself tagged, go ahead and do it, and then like let me know in the comments below if you do make a video on this or fill them out somewhere. I would love to know your answers to these questions. And I want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.